So I'm going to be talking about well-being tips for social media professionals, whatever sector that you're in. But of course, I have a background in charity sector and charity comms, so a lot of what I'll be talking about is probably focusing on that. I'm not a well-being expert. I'm not a counsellor. I'm not a well-being coach. What I am, as Phil said, is someone who has worked in social media for a very long time, since 2009. And I really understand the effect that working in social media can have on your mental health and well-being. We work in an always-on culture, and it's really, really difficult to switch off. Part of our job is to spot those reactive opportunities, which of course don't present themselves from 9 to 5 or working hours. And also when we're checking in on our personal social media accounts, we've always got sort of our head in work mode, spotting trends and opportunities for our organization. And then we're also expected to be on top of all the platform changes, algorithm changes, trends, best practice, and to be that social media expert in our organization. So it is a lot of pressure. It's very demanding. In charity comms in particular, we are really on the front line. So many people nowadays just bypass traditional means of communications. They don't pick up the phone, they don't send an email, they don't just go on the website to look for the answer to what they need. They'll tweet us or they'll message us on Facebook or Instagram and expect an answer within an hour, if we're lucky. They, expecting it to be more instant. And sometimes, most of the times, it's really easy to answer their questions, particularly if you have a sort of customer service focus to your social media channels, but sometimes it's not. Working for a children's hospital charity, I've had private messages. We're a UK children's hospital charity, but we get private messages on Facebook or Instagram from desperate parents, usually overseas, begging for us to help their ill child, sending us photos of that child, sending us scans, sending us doctor letters, just pleading for help. And knowing that we're not actually in a position to help them is really difficult. And we can often internalize that ourselves. I've also worked on emergency appeals when I was at the British Red Cross. And of course, we had to create and also share content that's really distressing, that shows destruction, despair, because of course we're trying to get donations to support our work and to help those people on the ground. And then of course there's social media crises. And it was actually back in 2019 when I saw a crisis unfold on Twitter with a national children's charity and an influencer that went on for days. I won't name them, some of you might know who they are. It went on for days, like at least 3 days. It was trending, it even got into national news. And it suddenly made me think, those people behind that social media account or accounts, it's them that are having to deal with all the really awful messages, the tweets, it got very personal. And I thought, what support are those social media staff receiving from their organisation? And also, if they're not, where can they find support? And I couldn't see anywhere where that existed for social media staff in charities. So I decided to do something about it. So I approached Charity Comms, I'm a trustee of Charity Comms, and I said, I think there's a gap for a guide on wellbeing for social media and comms professionals. Can I write it? And they said yes. Now, I authored the guide, but of course it's not my own work. There are case studies from charities, there are tips from counsellors, there are specific advice for wellbeing in a hybrid world, and I think some of actually the contributors, the charities are represented here today, like Marrins, Marrins, if you're here, thank you. So I am not here as an expert, I'm really just here to inspire, and a lot of my presentation comes from that wellbeing guide. So I really hope you'll go home, not maybe at home, don't do it in your home time. When you go back to work on Tuesday, I hope that you'll take some time to give it a read and that you'll find something useful to either implement for yourself or within your organisation. So I just want to set the scene a little bit. So Charity Comms has a salary and organisational survey, and it came out this year for 2022, and almost 25%, so a quarter of people, said that their role negatively impacted their mental health, with 3.6% saying that it impacted them really negatively. Thankfully, it's improved a bit from the year before, when it was 26.3% and 7.4%, respectively. And I think this quote from a senior social media officer is really interesting and important. So I would look favorably on organizations that specifically named mental health and well-being support in job packs, particularly for organizations that receive a lot of negativity online. So I think that is really important when you're recruiting for social media and comms staff, that, you know, if you do have well-being strategies or initiatives, that you put that in those job descriptions. This is a global state of work-life wellness report from Gympass, which is a company that provides sort of well-being benefits to organizations. 89% of Gen Z staff said they would quit if their employer did not focus on employee well-being. And Gen Z are 3 times more likely to rank well-being as being important compared to older colleagues. Social media, we all know, is something that we actually need younger people to join and help us, because I'm certainly not on top of all the TikTok trends. And I think it's really important that if we want to attract those younger people, that we focus on what they want, and what they want is a focus on their well-being, and to know that they're going to be supported. So back again to Charity Comms' salary and organisational survey. I thought this was great. 85% of people surveyed felt that they could talk about well-being at work, whether it was informal or formal, and that had gone up by 3% from the year before. That's great. They feel that they can talk about it. However, as a head of digital said, who works remotely, it's great that it's talked about, but actually not enough tangible action is being addressed to tackle underlying causes such as workload. And that brings me on to Helen Reynolds. I don't know if some of you know her, I'm sure you do. She runs Comms Creatives. You know, well-being, it's not an app, it's not a yoga class. As she says, employees can't meditate their way out of an unreasonable workload. Yoga sessions are not going to make leaders give clear directions. Healthy snacks in the staff area is not going to defeat a culture where you can't actually go out and have a lunch break. And then she said, does anyone else suspect that well-being initiatives often mask problems rather than tackling them? So I thought that was really interesting, because really, well-being needs to be embedded in organizational culture. It's not a tick box exercise. It's not, you know, here, have Headspace app for free as part of your benefits and everything will be great. As Richard Kramer, the chief executive at Sense, said, we want to make sure that a healthy workplace is part of our culture and ways of working at Sense. So again, it's not good enough that we're able to talk about it openly. If it's not being addressed, then it's not really that helpful. So what is well-being actually in the workplace? So there are 5 pillars of well-being. There are healthy relationships. So that's whether we have kind of meaningful relationships. There's financial well-being. So do we have financial security? You know, everybody knows the cost of living crisis at the moment. Is your organization doing anything to address that? At Charity Comms trustees, we made the decision to give our staff a cost of well-being increase this year. I know lots of other charities have done that as well. Another charity that I'm working with, they also did a cost of living increase, but they've also given staff access to grants if they really need them. Community connections, so this is about feeling a sense of belonging. And it could be a community at work, and obviously your friends and family outside of work. Physical health, are you able to do your job and be in good health? And career satisfaction, I think this one is also really important. Do you feel fulfilled? Do you have a sense of purpose? Is your organization helping you to achieve your career goals and development? So I think I saw someone from Mind was on the list. I don't know if they're in the audience. No? Okay, maybe they didn't get to come today. But I thought it would be really helpful to share some definitions of what mental health is and what a mental health problem is. And these come from Mind, the mental health charity. So, we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. And obviously our mental health can vary. It's like a spectrum. So sometimes we can have really good mental health, and other times we could have difficult emotions or severe mental health problems. So mental well-being is the ability to cope with everyday stresses of life, so whether you've got a bit of pressure at work or, maybe someone in your family is not that well, it's sort of those everyday stresses, but we're able to manage them. And we're still able to work productively and interact positively with others, and also being able to realize our own potential and that we have potential. Poor mental health is when we struggle with low mood, stress, or anxiety. And as I said, mental health is a spectrum of moods and experiences, and we're all going to go through periods of experiencing poor mental health. 1 in 4 of us at any time has a mental health problem. And this is when difficult feelings or experiences go on for a very long time, and they actually do affect our ability to enjoy life or to be productive at work. And some of those common mental health problems are depression, anxiety, phobias, and OCD. And even mental health problems are on a spectrum. Sometimes they can be quite, mild, and other times they can be very severe, where someone maybe needs to go to hospital in a crisis situation. So what are the signs of poor mental health? So, some of the warning signs around stress and anxiety are, really not being able to wind down or relax. So always kind of feeling on edge and, always having a lot of high energy, maybe having difficulty sleeping, working really long hours, dreading work. So, on a Sunday, if you're dreading the thought of work the next day, that is really a warning sign of stress and anxiety. As I said, feeling anxious, on edge. Some physical symptoms could manifest in having really bad headaches, having stomach issues, like a tight chest or jaw. And then in the workplace, I would say some of the warning signs are actually being expected to work past your working hours. I know, lots of organizations at the moment are maybe going through restructures, or there's a high staff turnover and it's taking a long time to recruit people. And then there's the expectation that you'll just take on someone else's work and you're suddenly doing 2 people's job. That should never be the expectation. Being set unreasonable deadlines, so, being asked to produce a report the next day, that is really unrealistic. Setting the tone from the top, senior staff who send email at nights or weekends, and the expectation is that you should be on your phone at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night to receive that email. Now, I will say some people work flexi hours and they do put that in their email signature. I might send an email outside of work hours. I don't expect you to respond. That's always really important to put in there because we all do have maybe flexible working arrangements. Also, feeling like you can't be open about your mental health, feeling, fearful that if you say that you're struggling, that's going to look at as you being weak or not able to do your job. And then lastly, there's no actual formal support in place for wellbeing. Your organization doesn't have any wellbeing initiatives or mental health support. So what can your organization do to support mental health and well-being? For one, they could have a well-being strategy, and that needs to address those 5 pillars of well-being, so emotional, mental, physical, career, and social. And it's often aligned, or should be aligned really closely with your organizational values. It also needs to be a living, breathing strategy. So it's not a strategy that gets created and then no one thinks about it for 5 years, because things are always changing. You know, COVID-19, we suddenly all went from being in physical offices to working from home, from me feeling isolated. You know, staff who had to work from bedrooms and all those sorts of things which have an effect on mental health. The cost of living crisis means that some of us cannot afford now to come into the office, or, you know, can't afford our heating or things like that. And staff turnover as well. You know, your staff are constantly, well, hopefully not constantly, but your staff are changing. So it's important that the wellbeing strategy works for everybody. So it does need to be revisited. You could offer resilience training. So, you know, we're often told, when we work in intense and emotional environments, that we just need to build our resilience. And resilience is often seen as a very individual thing, but actually we need to flip that narrative because it's collective. So this is a quote from Bruce Daisley, who lots of you might remember from his Twitter days. He spoke to Zoe Amor and Paul Thomas on their Starts at the Top podcast. He's written a book about this. And he says, resilience isn't an individual thing in an individualistic world. It isn't something that some of us have and some of us don't. Resilience is a collective thing. Resilience is the strength that we draw from each other. So I think by all means, have resilience training, but make sure it's not for an individual, that it's actually for a team. Have mental health first aiders. So, you know, if you work in an office, it's not a legal requirement, but probably 99.9% of offices have colleagues trained in first aid. But what about mental health first aiders? It's really important that people are able to talk to someone at their work, or that people can spot the signs, because that is what they're trained to do. So mental health first aiders are trained to spot the signs of people who they think might be experiencing stress, anxiety, etc., and then be confident to actually approach that person and start the conversation. And then lastly, to signpost them where they can get appropriate support. So hopefully a lot of that can be within their organisation, but it could be outside the organisation as well. Provide access to, caveat, so mental health first aiders, you can get training from Mental Health First Aid England and St John Ambulance. They both offer training and courses. So access to counselling. There's a term called vicarious trauma, which is used to describe the emotional impact that hearing about patient trauma has on actual therapists. And there's some evidence to show that the same phenomenon can happen to people who are exposed to trauma via social media. So it's important that your organisation offers some kind of counselling if you work in an environment where you are exposed to, you know, quite traumatic things. It could be that it's in-house. So, you know, again, lots of charities have helplines that are managed by experts, like, well, or the Samaritans, for example. When I worked at Cancer Research UK, we had access to the cancer nurses, so we could always go and talk to them if we were affected by a story we'd read or some kind of interaction we'd had. But you can also have access to external counsellors. So again, CharityCom's, one of our benefits to our staff is that they can access counsellors through a company. They have, you know, certain amounts of sessions that they can access. So how can you support your own mental health well-being and that of your colleagues? A wellness action plan is a good place to start. So this is available again from Mind. You can download it for free. It's got various wellness action plans depending on whether you're a manager, whether you work remotely, in a hybrid world, etc. It's essentially a personalized, practical tool to help us identify what keeps us well at work, what causes us to become unwell, and how to address a mental health problem at work. You can either do this just for yourself, but I would encourage you to actually share it with your manager, because what it does is it opens up a dialogue with them And it also helps them understand your needs and how they can support you. So it was actually inspired by Mary Ellen Copeland's Wellness Recovery Action Plan, which is an evidence-based system used worldwide to help people manage their mental health. Some of the things that it would cover are things like your working arrangements, so what hours you work, if you need any flexibility, your actual physical workspace, are you having to work in a bedroom in a shared home? Do you have your own office? Do you prefer to come into an actual office, etc.? How you like to be communicated with. Some people hate a telephone call, others just want you to message them in Teams. Things that would help your mental health at work, so having a dedicated lunch break. I know that at GOSH, we are encouraged to block out our lunch break hours in our calendars so that people can't put meetings. So, that's it, block that hour out, that is your hour for your lunch break. Exercise, whether you need to, go out before you start work for a walk around the block or to go to, an exercise class during your lunch break, etc. Behaviors or triggers, so whether, especially some organizations now have gone completely remote. So are you feeling a bit isolated? Maybe you're not getting that time that you need, that social time with colleagues. Maybe your organization is going through some big change, some restructure, and you're feeling quite anxious about that. Content triggers. I think this is really important, something maybe we don't often think about as social media staff. Are any of our colleagues triggered by something? At GOSH, for example, we're doing something for Baby Loss Awareness Week, and we had an external agency helping us monitor, so not creating the content, but they were doing the monitoring. And I reached out to say, this is coming up. We had a really, really emotional story. And I said, is this triggering for any of you? And they came back and said, thank you so much for letting us know. I have actually had a miscarriage. I'm fine with it, but thank you for thinking of us, because I said, if it is triggering, don't worry, we can take over that day. So it's really important to know what triggers someone, what kind of content might trigger their mental health. And then lastly, what support can be put in place. So is it that they want really regular feedback? They want one-to-ones that are either weekly, monthly, etc., flexible working. Any of those things can go in a wellness action plan. So the wellness action plan is very much for yourself and for your manager. A manual of me is more as a team building. So it's how to understand how your colleagues and your team like to work, or just what kind of person they are. So we're all complex and we're unique. And sometimes if we don't understand how somebody likes to work, we can make that person feel uneasy. So topics that it covers are conditions I like to work in, times, hours I like to work, best ways to communicate with me. Again, I had a colleague who hated just being called out of the blue. They wanted some notice. So, you would send a message saying, could we have a telephone call to discuss X, Y, Z? Whereas another colleague didn't mind at all. You could just phone her whatever time, it was fine. Ways I like to receive feedback, things I need, things I struggle with, things I love, etc. So it's really designed to help teams just to get to know each other a better, especially, as I say, we're not always in the office. It's much harder to really get to know someone because we don't have those sort of water cooler moments or, that let's go make a coffee together in the kitchen. We don't really have that opportunity anymore to get to kind of know our colleagues. And then, build well-being into your one-to-ones. This is a really good time to revisit those wellness action plans and talk through any areas of concerns. Often a one-to-one is often about work priorities or, we've got this campaign coming up. How are you getting on with it? Have you got any blockers? How can I help? And we don't really think about well-being, and we don't think to ask how people are doing and if they need any support. So it should be really a safe space for someone to check in and share any issues that they may be having. And then lastly, I don't know if all of you do this, but when you run a big campaign on social media, you usually have a debrief and like a retrospective. And I think we often don't include any kind of well-being element in that. So maybe thinking about, especially if it's, depending on your charity, a really emotive campaign, just checking in on everybody's well-being, how they found it. Did anyone think they wouldn't be triggered, but they were? And just checking in and, being able to share how something made them feel. And lastly, just to end on some helpful resources. So the Charity Comms Wellbeing Guide for Comms Professionals, available online, Marrins Wellbeing Action Plan, all free to download. Charity Solidarity Facebook group, anybody in that group from here? Oh, one. This is a really good group for obviously charity social media staff. It's a private group, and I think it stemmed really, it was started by Becky from RNLI when they had some social media crises. So it's a place where you can go and ask some questions, ask some advice, or just to give a shout out to a charity who's dealing with a tough time, just to say, we're sorry that you're experiencing that. Do you need anything from us? Is there anything we can do to help? Have a cry, whatever you want to do, we're here for you. The Manual of Me, you can find it on Charity Comms. It was written by Becky Colley. There is a template that you can download to fill it in. I recently did a podcast on social media and mental health with Julia Campbell from Nonprofit Nation. That Starts at the Top podcast with Bruce Daisley is really interesting about well-being and resilience. And then Charity Comms also has a series of well-being episodes with lots of different charities who talk about lots of different things. So I really recommend that you give those a listen and a read and a download. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Kirsty. I love a presentation that does exactly what it says on the tin. And when the first slide says inspire, that's setting the bar quite high. But I, for one, actually found that really inspiring and really, really enlightening, actually. I think I've learned more in 25 minutes about well-being at work than I have done in the last, probably about 40 years, as you can tell. But, and I think I did think we were doing a good job at Orlo, actually. And now I think we could probably do a few things a bit better, actually. So thank you for that. And the Manual of Me is definitely something that will be appearing at work at Orlo. I can see Hannah nodding, because I think Hannah is one of our mental health and wellbeing officers at the company. So we definitely want to get on top of that. So thank you for that. Any questions? I'm sure there's probably going to be lots for Kirsty about that presentation. Anything in particular? Okay, great.
Not hide behind the podium.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. It was brilliant.
Hi, Kirsty.
Hi, Spike.
I'm Spike from Shelter. You were talking about well-being as a part of an evaluation process, which I found quite interesting. Have you had much success in kind of making that stick and making things change? Because I have a bit of skepticism about how that is taken when it's very data-led. How did this campaign do, and where is well-being sort of ranked amongst that?
Well, I think that depends on the manager, right? So you set the tone for what that meeting and that evaluation is. I think it's just an opportunity to reflect on, like Baby Loss Awareness Week. It's, for some people, really emotive. There will be content that you don't think will be triggering, but then suddenly it is, and you find yourself crying and needing a break. And it seems silly because you're like, I don't even know why I'm crying. Why has this particular story made me really emotional when all of the content we deal with is emotional? And I think it's just a space during those retrospectives to say, did anyone have any, times where they felt something triggered them, or they felt, that they needed a cry? Or I think it's just bringing it in again to, we're all human. And it's just having that safe space, I think, to talk and to be in a team environment where if you're the manager, you're kind of leading that and you're being the example and saying it's okay to talk about this. And if you have had, starting, I guess, and setting, You know, no one sometimes wants to be the first person to be like, oh, that made me cry. You know, so if you can share something, like, I think that could be really useful. I would say working in social media sounds awful, but we do become like desensitized to things. But there will be the odd thing that, like I say, I don't know, sometimes there's not even an explanation why something has just hit you really hard. And I think it's just important to be open about it and just to share that with other people and say, you know, that made me feel X, Y, Z. Because someone else probably goes, you know what, so did I. And, you know, not saying there's anything necessarily that needs to be done about it, but it's just nice to share and to feel like you're not alone, I guess. I don't know if that answered your question.
And I just...
I had a sort of question on dealing with stressful situations in the moment. So there are times where even myself or working with the customer service team will obviously have, say, a resident has an issue and we've responded and now they've said, okay, I don't want to let this person go, and they start completely unloading on you. What's the sort of, do you have any sort of tips basically on how to manage that stress in the moment? So it's something, say, if there's an agent who I can see that's dealing with a stressful situation, I can see the conversation unfolding on Twitter, for example. Is there anything that you would say that I could do to kind of help?
So it's on social media, it's not like a phone call or...
Yeah, say on social media in particular. But I guess if they come back and say they've had like a phone conversation with a resident, because we tend to have that a lot where they will reactively quickly go to talk to a resident in like a high stress situation now. Is there any sort of things you could say that they could do to help in the moment? Yeah.
I guess just to stay calm and to... I think sometimes we can take things personally, even though it's actually got nothing to do with us in a sense. So remembering that it's not about us. So of course, Twitter especially, people like to be quite rude, and you know, and I think they forget sometimes that there's a person on the other end, that it's not just an account and a robot answering, it's actually a person. I think if you can see that one of your team is feeling distressed, can someone else take over? You know, can they maybe come in? Because they can see, they can read what's happened, but maybe they haven't built up that kind of emotional, so get them to step away, because the other person doesn't really know it's somebody else. So maybe getting someone else to step in and just saying, take 5 minutes, you know, go grab a tea and just, you know, kind of not calm down, but just try, take yourself out of this situation, I think is something you could probably do in the moment. And also giving your team, I guess, the, what's the word, power? Like knowing that they can ask for help, I think is really important, to say, if you really do feel like you need help, just ask. You know, don't think that you have to keep at it because it's your job, like someone else can step in, just say something. I think that's often the most important thing, is just say, I'm really struggling with this. I'm getting really anxious. I'm feeling really stressed. It's not helpful for that person either to have someone who's really stressed and anxious to deal with them. So I think taking them out and putting someone else in is probably helpful.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, thanks. Hi, thanks so much. I'm Imogen, I'm from Hospice UK. So, like, I guess this question is slightly twofold. We deal at Hospice UK, obviously we deal with like really, really tough subject matter all the time. And so there's kind of like the element of that just being our day-to-day bread and butter.
Yes.
And then also I was really interested to hear all the stuff about, you know, like, yeah, there's well-being, like go to yoga at lunchtime, or there's like, you know, deliver all these things right now. And that's the kind of real clincher in terms of well-being, particularly among kind of like, I'd say sort of officer manager level staff. What I'd be interested to hear is about how are you finding that people struggle more with hybrid working and like remote working? Because I sometimes feel like in the office, you can see if someone's struggling, you can see them just kind of like, you know, maybe getting a bit teary or just like, you know, wanting, like turning to you for help. But I find it really hard to know if people are struggling because, you know, it might be the subject, or it might be, you know, someone's sent them a really horrible email and they're trying to deal with it on their own. So like, are you seeing more of that? And also, are there any tips in terms of like helping staff with
Yeah.
that?
I mean, I think hybrid and remote working is very interesting because there are those who love it. They don't want to come into the office, quite frankly. They don't want the commute. They don't, they just like to sit at home, and that's fine. And then other people who don't, they want that interaction. And that's why I said it's really important. If we're all unique and individual, so those wellbeing action plans, that manual of me is really important because we are all different. And how do we know if someone actually likes working from home and if they don't, unless we ask? I would say it's about empowering your team to say if something is upsetting them, whether they're in the office or not. So an example, when I was doing the interim social media manager at Gosh, we had a piece of content go out about a little girl who had died. But years ago, not that that matters, but, she died a few years ago and her parents had written a book and they were, she had this little favourite giraffe. And anyway, we did some lovely social media around it to help promote the book. And one of our social media executive, she messaged on Ring Central to say, I don't know why, but this really triggered me. I'm crying, and I just said immediately, just step away, go out for a walk. We'll deal with, we'll monitor. She was monitoring social media. I'm like, we'll step in, we'll monitor it, don't worry about it. But I wouldn't have known because, of course, she was working from home. So I think it's about being, saying if something is upsetting you or worrying you or stressing you out, don't keep it in, just tell us, and then we will come in and say, no problem, go out for a cup of tea, go, I think her boyfriend was at home. I said, go have a chat with him, ask for a hug, just do all of that thing. So it's about just being open. I think that's what it is. It's having that open culture around it's okay to say this is upsetting me, because as you say, in the office we would have seen her crying, but she's not in the office. So yeah, empowering them to say, I'm struggling, I need some support. Or even, actually I don't think she even asked. I think she said, I'm crying, I'm going out for a walk. And it was like, great, go, no problem, we'll step in, it's fine.
I think also when we were all working from home, in the very start of the pandemic, we put loads of systems in place. So at Orlo, we used to have a morning call, evening call across all of our teams, and we were really religious with that structure. I think now we're hybrid working, we're less religious with that structure. So you're sort of in the work. I know as a leader, I found that really challenging. I'd like to think that we run quite a compassionate sort of business with people's time, and we're very conscious of people's individual circumstances. But, we're only sort of 40, 50 people, so you can be. But I think we had structures in place when we first started. We put morning calls in, evening calls in, just to check how people were for that reason, and to get that team cohesion and keep that team cohesion as an organisation. I think the trouble is now is because you don't necessarily know who's working in the office, who's at home. It's really hard to create those structures, every day for people. So I think definitely I encourage the leadership team at Orlo to make individual plans around that, so that we understand what people are doing, and are people working at home, because you don't always actually know where they are either, and if they're in a tricky situation, then it's really hard to deal with.
Yeah, I think also as an organisation, again, what happened I think a lot during lockdown is you would have those staff pulse surveys, and they would check in on your work, but those don't really exist anymore. So maybe have them again. If you are doing hybrid working, have those kind of pulse surveys and just get a check on how people's well-being is, just so you can know, oh, well, actually 40% of our staff say they're actually struggling right now. So how can we address that?
Cool. Right, we're kind of up on time as well. I know you're going to be around the rest of the day. Yeah, Kirsty's going to be around the rest of the day. So if you've got questions, I'm sure she'd love to answer them. And I know Kirsty's contact details running presentations. I saw lots of people scribbling notes and taking photos of the slides, which is amazing. You can carry on doing that. But just to remind you, the slides will also be available as well if you forgot to make a note of something, or you forgot there was something in particular that you wanted access to after this as well. I'm really pleased actually. Kirsty's we're dragging around the country with us to go on tour with us. So if you like the presentation that much, you could sign up for Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, one of the other venues, or encourage one of your colleagues to, perhaps who's at one of those venues as well, because I think that was a great learning experience, definitely. So tea and coffee, water, biscuits, don't know what there is outside, but go and grab something. We'll keep the break the same length. I'm not a fan of cutting back the break when you're sort of a bit back on time. We'll cut something else, right? So especially in the spirit of well-being. So let's take 20 minutes or so, maybe get outside, grab a bit of the sunshine that's out there, and we'll see you back in 20 minutes. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, Kirsty. That was great.